Okay, let me just quickly check if we are live. Uh, so we are so late in our preparations that I didn't keep my YouTube studio open
Uh,
where I can check whether we are already live or not.
that's all good.
Give me a sec. Yes, we are live. Perfect.
Fantastic.
Excellent. Hello, everyone. Sorry about this small delay in the start. We are clearly underprepared. It's the Diwali weekend. Welcome to Two Studio Heads Walk into a Bar. This is a space for small creative services, independent consultants, or studios to discuss the hard part of our work, which is how to run a business, to talk about the business side of things, and that too, particularly in the Indian context. If we can put that in, that just helps our community a lot. Uh, as a quick introduction, I'm Sovik, been part of this small initiative since the beginning. I run Miranj, which is a small strategic web design and development studio based out of New Delhi and Cambodia. And today I have with me Nav, who has been a part of a few other conversations before. Nav, a quick introduction from your side.
Yeah, thanks, Avik. Yeah, hi, my name's Nav. I'm a designer based out of Singapore, but for the last 10 years, I've spent a lot of my time running a studio, which meant I've had to take the role of of a salesperson, leading sales, growing the business, biz dev, managing clients, which is why I keep talking about money a lot because I realized when I took over that it wasn't something I enjoyed or had ignored for a long time, so I was scared of it. I had to learn over the years.
So, through this introduction, I think everyone would know exactly why Nav is here in this conversation, which is titled How to Triple a Client's Budget. Very, very
I have to
clickbaity
say,
title.
it's probably yeah. I think that's peak clickbaity for the podcast so far.
Absolutely. I never thought that we'll go this clickbaity ever, but it really clicked with me. So I said that let's do it
Didn't
anyways. But but in essence,
clickbaity.
what we are going to talk about really is negotiations. Like when you have mismatches in expectation, mismatches in budget and rates and other things, how do you deal with such things? And we have heard of things like, I'm going to quote what I feel is right. If they're okay with it, that's great. If they're not okay with it, else too bad, we'll just move on. And that has been the approach that many of us have been taking, and I have definitely been taking that approach for the longest time I've been running the studio. I don't know how to take the conversation towards a closure or try to turn people's mindset and converge on points to make certain things happen. I just hope that they'll accept what I say, and then it'll be a good project after that. So today we want to discuss what our experiences have been in negotiation with clients, with project owners, and even the larger project teams. So Nav, what's your view on negotiations, and what are the times when negotiations come at play? uh,
I think like I mean, we're negotiating all the time, right? So I know for this conversation we're kind of focusing on some moments in the studio life that we really need to think about these, but we're negotiating all the time, right? We're negotiating salaries, we're negotiating working hours, we're negotiating how many people are going to be on a project. I'm negotiating all the time what time we're gonna what time's nap time with my kids versus TV time. There's negotiation happening all the time, right? So we're negotiating all the time, but when it comes to especially when it comes to studio life, right, there's I think the when we're landing projects, that specifically, I think if we use that as kind of like the anchor, which is kind of what we were discussing earlier, right, if we use that as the anchor, I think it's quite an important moment in the sales process, let's say, or a project management process, and we can build from there. So the the other thing, like what you just said, right? The example you gave of it's either I'll quote what I think is right, and then
mhm.
the other person can take it, or they can leave it, and that's
Yeah.
fair, right? I don't think there's anything wrong with that approach. Like, just if we start from there, right? If we are starting the conversation from there, there's nothing wrong with that approach because you can be nice in that conversation. You could be like, I'm being fair. Look, this is what I understand, and hence this is how much it costs. Now it's up to you to decide whether you want to take it or not. Um, I think the challenge, like if we were to use that as an example and try and figure out what negotiation is, the challenge with that kind of conversation is that we are expecting the other person, the other party, to understand what they are buying. We are expecting the other party to connect with the value that we think this investment can bring them. And it's not always the case, right?
Yeah.
Um, two examples come to my mind. First is, Mike Monteiro wrote this really nice book called Design as a Job. And I think it's like 10, 12 years ago. Like, by the way, if you're a designer, it's an absolute must read. Doesn't matter if you're running a studio or whatever. Like, it's one of my favorite books, Design as a Job. In fact, I've got two copies right next to me. And in that book, there's one thing that he says that, it's kind of like one of those things that's really stuck in my mind. He says, you're a designer. Your job is to understand design and know design. Your client's job is to express what they want or what they're looking for. Their job is not to understand design. If they understood design, they wouldn't be coming to you, right? The reason they're coming to you is because they don't understand design, and they're coming to you to express whatever they're looking at a symptom and going, "Hey, I've got this pain. Can you fix it?" And sometimes they will suggest solutions as a way of just trying to communicate with you because you're a designer. And us designers have a lot of times we have this tendency to use language that doesn't make any sense to our clients, right? So we'll
Yeah.
say, things like, "Oh yeah, 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 we don't do waterfall or agile. We have design thinking. That's our process." And the client's like, "What the hell are you talking about?" And over time, you hear clients start using those terms with you without really understanding what that means. So all they're trying to do is connect with you, right? So Mike says, the goal of any conversation with the client should be that they walk out of that meeting feeling smarter than before they got into the meeting, not feeling dumber, right? And
Yeah.
it's really hits hard because you're like, yeah, I can think of so many conversations where I felt I spoke about all the right things, but I can totally understand why the client would have just felt like, I have no idea what this person was talking about. Maybe I don't understand this, right?
Yeah.
So part of that is that when we're talking about, take it or leave it, it's not a bad negotiation strategy, but part of that is that I think we need to start from there. That does the client even understand what I'm talking about? Do they even understand why I think this is so valuable or where they want to go? Or maybe so it's about understanding. First part of that is about empathizing with the other side. The other example that comes to my mind is if you think of your experience of going into a shop, right? And think of any experience where you went into a shop, you asked the person, "Hey, how much is this for?" And the other person's like, "Oh, yeah, this is whatever, 500 rupees or 5,000 rupees." And you go, "Okay, thanks," and you walk out.
Yeah.
That's a very clean conversation. There's no emotions involved, and that's fine, right? You're not going to remember that conversation. You're not going to remember that person, though. It was painless, but that's it. It's done. It's very transactional. Now,
Yeah.
imagine another conversation where you walk in and there's a little bit of a chit chat. You manage to connect. It may not be about the product. It may just be about something random. Maybe, that person's standing there. He's drinking coffee and you're wearing a coffee t-shirt and they just remark on it. And you're like, "Oh, you like coffee as well?" "Oh, I'm drinking this coffee. I like, espresso. What do you like?" Whatever that may be. There's a little bit of a connection. Doesn't have to be about the product at all. And then you get to the conversation about the product. I can guarantee it. You can ask the same question, "How much is this for?" And they can say 5,000 rupees. You'll have more tendency to A, remember that, and B, even stay around a little longer because you'll feel that you can just connect with this person and talk to them a little more. And you might just go, "Oh, okay, like, do you think this is worth it? Because I was thinking of getting that one or that one." It just opens up that, window for conversation, for connection a little more. Um, and I think that's kind of where, when we were talking about, take it or leave it, I'm like, to me that always, over time, it felt like I was just leaving. There's like a lot. It's not even about me just going, "You take this price or not." I'm just leaving the opportunity to connect and to build a connection and to build a relationship there. So that's kind of my, kind of like, I guess, like my larger overarching thought about negotiation that it's not about selling, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's about, like, if I had to summarize it, it's two things in my mind. One is negotiation is an opportunity to make a connection. It's
Right.
like, the first time you connect with a potential client or a client or anyone in the industry, it's it's your chance to make a genuine connection, right?
Mhm.
And connections go a long way. And that's one. The other thing is, it's not about selling, because I don't believe negotiations are about me trying to sell something to someone, me trying to make someone understand something. Um, that's how I used to think about it. That's how I used to go. That, okay, they're coming to me. I can tell them this is how much mobile apps cost. So I can give them three examples. You have this kind of app, this kind of app, this kind of app. They'll cost this much. Now choose which one do you want. That's still me trying to just tell them something and negotiate with, or convince them that. Uh, Sorry, not convince them. Me trying to make them understand something. Me try to get them to buy something. If you
Mm-hmm.
reframe it to, it's me trying to understand what their pain is and then really trying to help them figure out what they really need, it changes the whole game, I think. It changes the
Right.
entire game here. It's not about selling anymore. It's about going, okay, you've come to me, you're telling me you want this. Tell me a little bit more about why do you think you want this? I don't know what the solution is going to be. I don't know how much it's going to cost, but let me help you figure out what the best thing here is, right? So that's like the overarching, I guess, my thought on negotiation.
Nav, in the first 10 minutes, you have completely changed my worldview of negotiation, because that's not how I used to view negotiations. Uh, Even like before this podcast, because my definition of negotiation has been the more traditional one, which you just pointed out. The understanding was not that well nuanced, where you're trying to build a connection and the connection goes a long way. Understand like that. And I think this really opens up what are the different things that we do, how we have been doing. And when I think back, even that first approach, which is take this price or leave it, part of it was for us to say that, hey, we don't want to compromise on our price. It's all like thinking about us, right?
Hmm.
We don't want to like let our price, it will set a bad precedence. Next time they'll come and they'll ask for even lesser, and things like that. But we have never treated it as a conversation or as a thing wherein are we helping the other side understand what we are selling, what value are we bringing. Probably we were not as well asking this question, that that or even understanding this bit, that maybe they don't get what we are trying to sell and what is the value. This part is this never crosses through your mind when you're talking to clients. It's always about us what I want this much price, and
Yeah.
if they don't get this price, then someone else will probably pay for it. And I think when you change the definition like this, it really makes me reflect that there are so many conversations that did not work out, and it doesn't work out, then you feel a little bit bad that, yeah, it didn't work out, but that's okay, that's a part of business. But on the flip side, you could have made it into a long term possibility, or you could have turned it around and actually worked with them. And so the one of the questions that come in my mind is that, should negotiations be done in only environments where you strongly feel that you want to connect with this client, or should it be there in every interaction with clients and different opportunities?
Well, first of all, like, I think it's hard to know which client you want to connect with. Like, getting to that point of, I really want to work with this person.
Hmm.
Um, for a lot of clients, potential clients, you just wouldn't know. You just wouldn't know before you've had a few conversations, right? So, like in design, I know we've spoken about this in different ways in the past, that we have this tendency to, in some ways, work with clients who understand what we do, understand the value of what we do, right? And
Hmm.
that's great. I don't think there's anything wrong with it, right? It just makes things flow smoother,
Yeah.
makes things much more productive, right? The client knows when things take time, all of that's great. But when you have like clients just coming up to you and they don't know, understand necessarily what you uh, why you do things the way you do when they've not been working with designers in the past. Um, uh, they're not going to be able to talk to you in a way that appeals to you. They're going to talk to you in a way that doesn't sound like design at all, right? So in
Very
those kind of stuff,
transactional.
yeah, I mean, definitely you would have the example that comes to my mind is we were talking to this client. They run one of the largest fleet of school buses in Singapore. So
Hmm.
uh, uh, they basically work with schools and they manage the school's entire school bus fleet. So that's the service that they give, right? So transportation as a service, basically, right? So they work with different schools and do that. Now they came and they said, "Look, we want to build an app." Or like, "What do you want to build an app for?" They're like, "Well, our parents want to know where's the bus. Everyone
Yeah.
wants to know with Uber, with Deliveroo. They want to know where's the bus. Is my kid on the bus or not?" So they said, "We want to build an app." And they spoke in that manner because that's the best way they could express what they were trying to do. They thought they wanted an app, but they are not going to be able to talk about research or usability testing or UI or wireframes or mockups. They have no idea about any of this stuff. They're not going to be able to talk this way. So they will talk. I want an app. How much for an app? That's it. That's the
Hmm.
conversation. I want an app. How much for an app? And so there, like the conversation, for me to know if I really want to connect with this person or not, I have to think beyond just like how much they know about design, right?
Yeah.
I have to start thinking about other things that I think may be even more valuable, right? What kind of it'll differ for different people in different cases, but maybe for me at that point was like, what do they value? What are they trying to do? What they're trying to achieve? Is that something I'm interested in? That only came about after a couple of conversations.
Got
So,
that. So this
and
is
I,
this is a little different for you probably than us, because I think almost every inquiry or every new inquiry that comes to our table, uh, there is a really like a strong evaluation on, do we want to work, like, without knowing who the person is, what their
hmm,
personality is, how do they talk, do they understand design, that is different, but do I connect with their purpose, do I connect
yeah,
with the work that they're doing, do I want to be associated with this, like I strong, or do I see that I might learn something really cool in this project, or I'll be
hmm,
really happy to associate with this project. So so I have a tendency to be more open to negotiation, right,
hmm,
when there is something like this. And at that point of time, at some point of time, I'll even bend over backwards, like, just to
hmm,
get
hmm, hmm,
that work in a way. And when there are projects which are that feel more repeat of rinse repeat of things that we have done before, not something
yeah,
that we are really passionate about, or something like that, that is when I'll be like, more, take this price or leave it.
yeah.
So do you think that this is this is an approach that should also be changed, or does negotiation, you should be open to negotiate, like, maybe the way to phrase this would be, uh, do you negotiate differently with different type of clients? Is that the way to go? Do you have any thoughts around this?
Well, you kind of have to. Like, I mean, it's like a design problem, right? There's always, there has to be some level of customization. Like, especially if you get into trying to build connections,
Hmm.
you inevitably will approach things in a different way. Every problem will be different. Every ask will be different. The way clients express their needs will be different. So inevitably, I think you will. And I don't think there's anything wrong with letting your impression of the client influence how you negotiate,
Yeah.
right? So it will happen inevitably, right? But I think the fundamental point here is that if you can change how you if you go in with that expectation that, look, I'm just going to try and look at this whole conversation as a me trying to help them figure out what the best solution is,
Hmm.
right, rather than me trying to sell them my services,
Hmm.
right? Plus, I'm there as a designer and they're not a designer, so I'm here to
Yeah.
help them understand how design can help. You go into every conversation If you go into every conversation with that approach, then you evaluate the conversation from that approach. Is like, is this working? Is this going to work or not? And you will still get into conversations where after, like, maybe one or two conversations, you just kind of know that this is not going to be worth it, right? And
Yeah.
that's fine. Like, at the end of the day, like, if we're talking about price negotiations, it is about business. right? And it is
Hmm.
about your time as much as it is their time as well. So it is also like you want to build connections, but there will obviously be lines that you have to draw and say, look, I've spent so much time with this client.
Hmm.
Um, I have to be objective about do I want to continue this conversation at this point or not? And depending on where you are in the stage and the year in between projects, you may have more time or less time, right? Like it's if your pipeline's really full and you've got 10 conversations going on, you might go that okay, at this point I've done enough conversation and I don't think this is going to work out. um, you might be evaluating with opportunity cost for other projects, or there might be times when you're like, well, I don't have anything going on. Maybe I want to push into this more. Although I will remark one thing that even when you're really, really busy, let's say you've got a big pipeline, not spending enough time with every client will just hurt you in the long run. I think even in the
Yep.
sales process, you want to
I
give attention to every client. So if you've got 10 clients in the pipeline, pick only three. If you know you can only work with three at a given time, but work with them properly, because if you don't, you're gonna if you try to rush through all 10 of them, potentially you're gonna ruin the relationship with all 10 of them. They're not gonna come
Yeah.
back to you because they're gonna go, this is like that shop I walk in, there's like 10 people standing around, nobody's paying attention. You ask someone, they just very curtly, very dryly just tell you this is the solution. They're not connecting, and you just walk out. You never want to walk back in again, right?
Yep.
So you don't want to do that. Negotiation's all about building those connections.
Which I think is a good lesson. Like if you this very bit that you just said, that you might work with only three but build relationship with all 10 or maybe nine or eight, like
Mm.
most of them, and don't just treat each conversation as here's the price, take it or leave
Yeah,
it.
yeah, yeah.
uh, it's going to be really valuable in the long run, because I have definitely found in my own experience, and that is where my personal growth has been over the last 3 or 4 years, is that conversations that had started out 2 years back, it didn't turn into a sale, but it turned into a new inquiry and a new sale about 2 years from that point of
Yeah,
time.
yeah,
And
yeah.
that is that kind of gives me the confidence that yeah, it was good that I took the time to understand their problems. It took the time to build that connection. It didn't work out at that point of time. That's okay. I really wanted it to work out then as well, but it did work out later.
I would almost always choose telling a client that I really apologize, but we're just swamped for the next 2 months. So I don't want to waste your time. I don't want to get into conversations. I recommend someone else. I would rather
Hmm.
do that. Like even in that scenario of 10 clients knocking on my door,
Hmm.
I would rather say that and not even get into conversation, politely decline and,
Hmm.
maybe recommend someone else rather than just trying to stretch myself too thin amongst a bunch of different clients. It's delicate. Like you're trying to
And just
build
be
a healthy
helpful.
pipeline and yeah, so I mean, yeah, absolutely. It's like being nice, always being nice, being respectful. Yeah, like why wouldn't you do
let's
it?
Yeah, let's go a little bit more into the price
Yeah.
negotiation bit, which you just talked about. Now, let me take that end of the spectrum, wherein
Hmm.
you want to be taking on that project really, but
Hmm.
you also have a business to run, so you want to
Yeah.
quote a good price for it, and there might be a mismatch. Now, there could be a mismatch, there may not be. You might already know that there is a mismatch, you may not know there's a mismatch. What are some of the things that you would say you should do so that you are able to negotiate well with that client, so that you also get the business, you get it at a
Yeah.
good cost?
Yeah.
How would you approach such a situation where it's not the process is not take this price or leave it, but the
Yeah.
process
Yeah.
is more about I really want this to work out?
I think so. Uh, I would say one of the things is in especially in those kind of actually in any kind of negotiation, any kind of sales process. Let's say when we're talking about, I always think like you should talk about the hard things first, and this
Okay.
applies to even when I'm trying to hire people in my team. Like I talk about the salary in the first chat, and I never say how much are you getting right now. I always say what's your expectation, because I don't want to waste your time. I don't want to waste my time, right? Like if we keep talking, or you go through all the interview process, and in the end you say, "Hey, I was expecting this much salary, and I just don't have the budget for it." I wasted your time, I wasted my time. What was the point of it all, right? So similarly, even sales negotiations, I think you should start with that, right? What type of time are you looking at? Do you have a budget in mind? Why are you trying to solve this problem, or what's the problem you're trying to solve? Like, why are you trying to think of the solution? Why do you think we would be the right people, right? You want to have those conversations. And I think usually there's this spectrum that this conversation will land on. There's on the one hand would be you're talking to someone who is basically all they're trying to do is collect quotes. That's it. They're not interested in anything more. All they're trying to do is they've been told that, hey, just get 5 quotes, we'll get to know how much does this stand in the market. That'll be one
Yeah.
end. On the other end will be people who are maybe really, really, they have the problem well defined in their mind, they have a budget well defined in their mind, and they are the ones who are really rooting for the project in the company as well, right? So these are people very, very clear. This is why we want this. Wait, did I just completely go out of focus?
Yeah,
There we
that's okay. I think if you just stay still at one distance from the camera, it'll keep you in focus.
go. Um, so yeah, you'll end at that. So if you ask those hard questions, what kind of time, what is it that you're trying to solve? Why you think of the solution? Why yes? What kind of time are you looking at? What kind of budget do you have in mind? So
Mhm.
if you end up on this side of the spectrum where people are just collecting quotes, they will not be able to give you answers to any of those,
Yeah.
right? They don't know. All that they say, well, we just want to build an app. Just tell us how much it'll cost. They don't know how
Yeah.
much time. Maybe they'll say throw a number like, oh, 3 months. We have this launch event in 3 months. We need to do it. They can't talk about anything else, right? And on the other hand, you might get into a very fruitful conversation. You might get into like, okay, yeah, let's discuss this. The reason I bring up the spectrum is if you are at that point where you're like, I really want to work on this project, at that point, if you have that conversation, you will basically be able to identify if this is the right person you should be negotiating with or not. So it
Got
could
it.
be, let's say, an NGO that you really want to work with, but now the person you're dealing with is a person who has no idea.
Hmm.
You're not gonna get anywhere with that. You know that right off the bat. This is not gonna go anywhere. It doesn't matter how much you invest in it. If you want to make this conversation move, you need to try and figure out who the right person is to talk to, right?
Yeah.
So, so even if it's like something you're like, hey, I really want to make this work, you talk about the hard things first because it starts establishing, can you actually work on this? It could be an NGO, but they may just not have the budget. Or worse, they may have the budget, but they may just not have the time. And it may be impossible for you to work on it. If you just can get into that stage of, or can it get into that conversation of talking to the right person, talking about why this is important to them, talking about what the problem is, really trying to uncover the problem, you can then very easily get into the stage of conversation which is not about, okay, you were looking for this, I'll charge you this much. You can get into a conversation which is, you're trying to achieve this, there's this way of getting there, right? And
Hmm.
the ideal way may take us 3 times the time that you have in mind, but I now understand why you want to do this in 3 months because you have a pain somewhere, right? So why don't we structure it this way? Why don't we work on this for 2 months and we'll help you fix this part of the pain first? And
Hmm.
then if that works and if you're still keen, then we can look at the next thing, right? So I think the conversation changes. Like if you remember from a value-based pricing conversation, that's what really appealed to me about the value-based pricing model as well, where you change the conversation from being, I want this, how much will you pay for it, right?
Yeah.
And the truth is in the market, a lot of people are just buying like that. They're like, hey, I want a
Yeah.
website, I just want a cheap website. I think a lot of conversation would just stay there that I want a website for this much. You're
Hmm.
not The chances of that being an interesting piece of work is going to be so low. There's no one
Yeah.
invested in it,
Yeah.
right?
Absolutely.
So if you're like, I really want to work on this project, not for the money, right? We're
Hmm.
keeping money aside for a second. If it's like you're really interested in it, then try having those conversations, get into that, see if this project can be a project like that. On the other hand of the spectrum now, you can also be in a state where you're like, I just need the money,
Hmm.
right? That's a very different conversation,
Yeah.
right? Your approach is very different at that point. The hard conversation first may still be a valid conversation, I think, there, because you
Yeah.
may like if you can get the budget up front, you can get a range. And I know like this is something we experimented with a lot. There's this. sales tactic, right? Like our sales rule that everybody you talk to, both sides of the table know it. You never want to be the first to give a
Reveal the
budget,
numbers.
reveal
Yeah.
the numbers, right? And it's like, I'm like, that's not smart because both sides of the table know this,
Yeah.
right? So how do you get past it? And I remember like with Adam, we would talk about this a lot, and we just started doing this. We would draw a line on the piece of paper, right? And we go, okay, so I'm trying to figure out what the budget is. I don't know, right? So I'm gonna put $0 here,
Hmm.
right? And with whatever, I'm gonna put 200,000 here,
Hmm.
whatever, like number based on roughly based
Yeah.
on what this may be. It doesn't really matter. Where do you think we should put the like? Can you like roughly put like where do you think this would be, right? Because from
Yeah.
what you've told me so far, the I think it will be about here.
Oh, okay.
Like and we would do this, and it like roughly it would be like, well, some people would say, well, it could be here, it could be here,
So
here,
you
here,
would
here.
do this activity with the client, or are you doing
Yeah,
it
yeah, yeah.
internally?
Sitting in no, no, no. Sitting in front of the client, like you just say,
Oh, wow.
look, this is it, right? Like I think what you're telling me, it would cost you roughly here. I don't know exactly how much, and I don't expect you to tell me exactly what a budget is. So can you tell me a range? The other one was like, tell me a number that you know. If we went above, there is no way we can get this. Just tell me that
Okay.
number, right? Just tell
That's
me
interesting.
what's the number that you can't, that you think we should just never go over. That's a very easy question to answer for people because you've turned it about, you've framed it not as in what's the minimum you can pay, but you've gone, what's the maximum you're willing to pay, and that's fine, right? Um,
Yeah,
like,
because you know what, Nav, in that spectrum that you said, I had a different person in mind as well, who's not really falling in that the two edges of the spectrum. Because on one side you said someone who's just collecting quotes. On the other side,
yeah,
you said they know the answers to these things. What is the problem?
yeah,
Clarity in the problem space, clarity
yeah,
in what their budgets are. Because I frequently and more often than not uh, come across the first part, people collecting quotes,
yeah,
and the next part, most common one, is where people genuinely don't know the budgets, but they want
yeah,
help. They
yeah,
also genuinely don't understand the problem space very well, and we have to often help them do that,
yeah,
get that clarity in a way. So,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
so for me, the other end of the spectrum is wherein the person is in, like the part that you just said, find out who's the right person to be talking to. So they are the right people to be talking to. They have the authority. They
Mhm.
can control the budgets. They know what to do, but they are looking for guidance, basically.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
uh,
And that's a great client to have. I love that. I
Mhm.
love that
Yeah,
one, right? Like that bus example that I was giving is exactly that. The guy who we started talking to was the son of the owner of the company. So he
yeah,
was this young guy who'd come in, and he was kind of like, I'm gonna make the bus companies old. They've been doing really well for the last 30 years. And he's like, I'm the transformation person, right? Young blood into the company. And he was just doing that. It was literally that. He's like, I don't know. I just want to build an app. And we started getting into why do you want to build an app? Started talking from that perspective. That, okay, look, if you build an app, there's these five, six things that you might even need to think of. If you build an app, who's actually looking at that app, like, for the app to have the whatever bus location. I'm just making this up on the fly now.
yeah,
Bus
yeah,
location. How do you think where do we think that gets from? That comes in from. So you're like, oh, I don't know. Maybe we need to have another app in the drivers for the drivers to use. We're like, okay, so now we're talking about two apps. So suddenly there's an aha moment, like, oh, okay, yeah, okay,
Mhm.
yeah, yeah, two apps. Okay, cool. Um, and okay, well, you've got now the bus drivers and the parents. You probably want to have another app that lets you internally monitor where your buses are as well, right? Because
Yeah,
otherwise, you risk bus drivers going everywhere and parents are seeing that, oh, this is where my bus drivers are, this is where my bus drivers are, and they calling you and going, why is the bus driver there? And you have no idea where they are. So you want some kind of
yeah,
a dashboard, and it's like, oh, okay, aha moment, right? So it's
yeah,
that it leads to that in those kind of conversations, inevitably, again, you would get to a point where someone will say like something like, "But everyone does this, right? Uber does this, Deliveroo does this, Grab does this. It shouldn't be that hard, right? It's a problem that's been solved, so it shouldn't be that hard." And
yeah.
I mean, that's an easy one to get past, right? Then I mean, you just go, "Cool, Uber's Grab's worth $7 billion. Awesome, cool.
Yeah.
How much are we spending on this, right? Do you have $1 billion? Yeah, we can get it done. We can license the. thing from like it's easy, but it's again everyone's just trying to express things, right? I'll go back to that book, Designer's Job. Another thing that's very relevant to the question you asked. Mike Montero says that everyone who comes to you is and trying to get a project, right? You have to remember that they are on the other side of the table. Whoever you're talking to also has a lot at stake when they are trying to figure out if you're the right partner for them, right? So it
Yeah,
could be someone who has who's been as a they could be the, let's say, running a company. They've earned this they've spent, I'm completely messing up my words. They put in a lot of work to earn this money that they want to now spend on doing something that they've never done before, probably, right? They're
right.
working with you, trying to do something new. It's a lot at stake for them. Like hard earned cash they're putting here, they need to be sure of if this is going to get them somewhere or not, right? Like if this is going to. So, which is why at that point, you can easily have that conversation. Look, what do you value? Let's stop thinking about the app for a second. What are you really trying to get out of it? And let me sit with you and let's try to work together on this. And let's try to find out if we can find a solution to this. You might have another person, another kind of person would be like, they're not running the company. They're just the middle manager. Now their
Yeah,
job, their promotion may be on the line. They are the ones who are doing this. They still need to deliver the project. Their promotion may be on the line, or their bonus may be on the line.
yeah,
They want to send their kids. So the other person also has a lot at stake. So it's about
yeah.
really trying to get to that level as well, right? Like, what is the value of this for you? What are you really trying to do here? And can I then sit with you together and help figure out how we come up with a solution. So let me just add a couple other things, right? So just very objectively, we were talking about when you're talking about price, how do you get into that conversation? So I think one of the things is talking about hard things first. Just get those out of
Right,
the way as soon as possible, or at least get a sense of where you are, right? Because it'll help you at least figure out if you can work in that ballpark. If you can,
yeah,
even if you need to, let's say, go into if someone's saying I want to build an app that does exactly what Uber does, but it needs to be done in 3 months, you can be honest with them and say, look, 3 months it can't be done, but let's try and figure out what can be done in 3 months. That's one. Second is I would say just as like very, very basic sales things, like I think options always helps. If you ask for definitive answers, it's very hard, especially like in that scenario where you're saying people are genuinely just looking for guidance. In that case, if you ask people hard questions, they can't answer those, right?
yeah,
If you say like, "What's your budget?" People might be like, "I don't know what my budget should be. I've never done
yeah,
this, so I actually have no idea." Right? So
yeah,
that's where you kind of talk in gradients or options. Like that's where that
yeah.
thing was. Like, okay, what's the maximum you can spend? Let's talk there,
Right.
right? They may be scared of that answering that as well, but give options. You could say that, okay, look, there's two sides of the spectrum. On the one hand, you can get something like this done. It'll take you about this much time, this much money. On the other hand, it's this. And I'm not saying pick one. I'm saying this is the spectrum. We could probably end up somewhere in the middle, but I need to understand where you stand so we can figure out,
Hmm.
right? Um, there's the third thing I would say, just in general, especially when people are looking for guidance, is conversations can get very vague. It can be like if you say, okay, let's talk about what the value is, you can start talking about it, you can spend 2 hours discussing it, and then you go your own way, and nobody has any idea what happens next, right? So, so create actionables. Always try to see if there's an actionable. And you can do this by being very selfish as well. So what I mean by that is, like I said, negotiations about their time, but it's also about your time as well.
Hmm.
If you're getting into these conversations of really trying to understand value and really trying to understand what they're trying to achieve, you can be very honest with them and say, look, I also need to figure out where we're going. And can we try to at least get to a point where we have a clarity on your budget or your time by the end of next week? Because otherwise, I also don't know how we can progress. So, having those kind of actionables, setting some kind of milestones, just creating those milestones targets, it just helps keep the conversation going. Just
Right.
keep on moving, keep on moving. Uh, yeah, I mean those couple of things that came to my mind as soon as you said, like if we talk about price, budgets, and stuff. Um,
So let
yeah,
me add a couple of things over here, and I also want to know your thoughts about this. Let me start with the first thing that I had, and this is around options, which you just pointed out. Uh, in my experience, in the beginning, for the first several years where I was running, when I've been pitching for projects and all, I would always have that, quote this one price. If they accept it, that's okay. Otherwise, move on. And then slowly I realized that no, giving options is a good thing. And
Hmm.
what made me realize giving options is a good thing is mostly thanks to all SaaS apps. All right.
Uh-huh.
Every SaaS app, we
Yeah,
are
yeah,
using Restream right now. They have three options for me to pick.
yeah,
Right?
yeah,
No,
yeah,
no,
yeah.
not just three. Now they have six. But in the early days, I think by early days I mean like 2012, 13, around that time, the SaaS model started just picking up, and they started throwing two options. There's no one price. They have like two price, three
Mm-hmm.
price, kind of tiered your value
Yeah,
as well.
yeah,
That if you pay more, you get more, and things like that.
yeah.
So from there, I learned, uh, or at least I would say that I think giving options might be a good thing, but we have been giving options mostly at the pitch stage. All right. But what you
Hmm.
just talked about is kind of giving options or showing a gradient at very early stage of the conversation as well. So where
Hmm.
do you think options should be at both places? Do you think options should be only at the early stage of the conversation, at the at later on when you pitch, give only one price? Or do you feel that even while pitching you should have options there as well?
I'm not sure. Like the way I see options is it's a good way to help people express things.
Hmm.
You put a gradient in, you say you don't need to pick one. Just give me a range, give me an idea. That's all I'm trying to
Hmm.
get to, right? So it's making it easier for people to answer hard questions. That's one.
Hmm.
The other is it's also helping people understand the gradient that which they can choose to work on. So you know the classic time, cost, and quality. You
Quality.
can only
Yeah.
pick two, right? And
Yeah.
I think over time I've just realized like realistically the kind of work we do like in design, you can't just change quality on a whim. You can't. Doesn't matter how you can fool yourself that, oh, if they're paying me more I'll really do good quality work. No, you can't. Like, you as a studio have a defined level of quality because that's the level you
Exactly.
deliver every time, right?
Hmm.
You can't just not kick up quality on a project and kick down quality on a project. We're not in that business. If
Yeah.
someone's paying you cheap, you're not going to go, I'm going to put a really bad designer on it. You're just
Yeah.
not in that business. There are other businesses that do that. We're not in that business. So quality is constant, basically, right? So
Hmm.
time and cost, I think, yeah, you can tweak around with them a
I,
lot of times.
I'll bring a different triangle over here now,
Yeah,
because
yeah,
there is the time, cost, quality, and then
yeah,
what in my conversation I had switched it to, and it's
yeah,
also standard time,
yeah, yeah.
cost, scope, where
Time
quality is
cost scope.
constant. So
Yeah,
what
yeah,
I start varying is the scope,
yeah, yeah,
effectively.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So I was gonna say, right, like I think even for our scenario here, the like what I was gonna say was that the cost is tied directly to time
Hmm.
for a
Okay.
lot of consultancies. It is, right? Like that's how we budget.
Hmm.
That's how we
Yeah.
create costs. So I can't say like what would I do if the client said, okay, I'll give you 5 times the money.
Hmm.
What can I do? I can say, okay, I'll bring in two other designers, but in a lot of scenarios, that doesn't make things go faster. It doesn't
Oh,
improve on
absolutely
the
not.
time,
Yeah.
right? So it doesn't. So time and cost are kind of tied to me. Like if a client wants to give more money, that means I can spend more time on it. What does that mean? That means I can either be very thorough with some of the work that I was doing. I'll spend more time on research, maybe more time on usability. I can reduce risk, basically. That's
Hmm.
how I see it. If you
Hmm.
give me, more time, which will cost you more, I can reduce the risk of what you put out in the market. That's one.
Got. Yeah.
Or the other thing is scope.
Scope.
That's how I see it, right? So
Absolutely.
I would say there's risk, there's scope, and there's cost.
Yeah.
Like cost is directly tied to time is what I would say, right?
Yeah.
That's the triangle. So I was kind of building towards that, you kind of mentioned scope, and yeah, I totally agree. There's
Yeah.
so for design, because design is about reducing risk a lot of time, like prototyping, research, it's all about reducing risk. So to
Hmm.
me it's like, yeah, you can give me more money, right? Now you could use it to either add more scope or reduce risk. You
Yeah.
choose,
Got that.
right?
Got that.
So you have a constant
That's
budget,
a
and so
The risk factor is a new thing, and it's quite an interesting aspect that you've added, because I've not been thinking risk as much as I've always been thinking scope. So eventually, when we give out our options, the three options at the pitch stage these days,
yeah,
we really have differential scope that we are covering in all of them.
yeah, yeah,
in some way, yeah, I can now connect to it, that the ones where they're larger scope, it also mitigates risk in certain fashion, and I really need to phrase those in my thing, but I think this is a good one. uh, I'll also add one more thing over here, the next
Mhm.
thing in negotiation, which I kind of had come across only about last year. Tell me
Mhm.
your thoughts about this. And uh, for the longest time, what we have been doing is sending our pitches by email, that here's a proposal, this is what we do. And
Yeah,
then
yeah,
sometime last year, someone said that we never send our proposals or costs on an email,
yeah,
always present it to the client. Okay. What do you
yeah.
think of these things? Do you think that there is a value in always presenting your price and your proposal or your pitch to the client as opposed to emails? Does that really help with the negotiation?
As a guiding principle, yes. I never, and that applies to not just client pitches. That also applies to design critiques, design reviews, anything with a client. We had this rule: we would just never ever send the mock-ups for a design if we couldn't present it. We would send the context. We would make them understand what this is about, but we would always present. And the reason for that is, again, coming back to, we're the designers, right? They've
Hmm.
hired us to help them understand design. Email, it doesn't communicate that. So when I present something
Hmm.
to you, I have to get on a call. It doesn't always work out. Like, I know it's very hard to always be able to get the client, and but we always try to, right? We'll go. I remember Adam, started doing this. He would send the deck. So we had this strategy that during the sales process, Adam was always looking for this one champion on the client side, right? Who is
Hmm.
going to be our champion? And he would use sending the pitch to this person almost as a tactic to build a better relationship. So he would say, "Look, I need to present this to this board, but let me send this to you first. You give me feedback. What do you think?" And that was
Hmm.
actually brilliant because he
Oh
would
wow.
send deck,
Hmm.
the other person would be able to go, and but Adam would be very clear that, look, you have to let me present it to the CEO because they won't be able to understand. So let me send this to you. Let's get on a quick call. Tell me what your reaction is. So let's say
Hmm.
you're the champion. I send it to you, and I'm like, okay, Sovik, so what do you think? And
Yeah.
I'm just looking for your reaction. What's your reaction? It'll just help me build a better case. And
Yeah.
it's by doing that, I'm kind of pulling you onto my side. I'm building a better relationship. So when I step into that room with the CEO, with the board, I'm not just
Hmm.
there standing alone against everyone. I've got you on my side a little bit as well, right? So,
Right.
but at the fundamental level, yeah, like sending a pitch without being able to present is, I almost feel, is dead on arrival. Like, how do you think they're going to evaluate it? It's going to be so hard to look at that and go, to understand,
Right. I
because
think
it's going to
also
be
beyond
yeah,
understand, I think beyond understanding as well. I mean, one part is that they won't understand, and that's obviously that's again a reminder. You have to
yeah,
always question this, that does the other side understand the things as well as you do? And usually the answer is going to be no. But on the flip
mm,
side, when you're presenting it, then you also get to know their reaction. You get to figure out where their concern is, and you
yeah,
also get to figure out how we can tweak it to make it more aligned to what they need, as
yeah,
opposed to take it or leave it.
totally,
And
totally,
that feedback in a way is something that I've started valuing more and more, in the sense, here is the pitch to you, give your reaction, tell me what your concern is, ask them about their concern, and if they have a concern, then you could offer that I can work it out,
yeah,
kind of
yeah,
a thing. But that opportunity you'll never get if you're not pitching. At the same point of time, I've only recently started doing it. It's not that this is still an idea in my mind, and I just want it validated. Do you think this is right? Because I haven't had enough examples where clients have been really open about what they would like to be changed or tweaked to meet their needs. but
yeah,
but I have to do a few more times, and then probably this I'll be sure about this. But at this point of
yeah,
time,
yeah,
I have this hunch that presenting has this big value, that I get to know a little bit about their concern, and maybe I can tweak things to make it work.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah, no, totally, totally. Um, I
The
think, like,
Yeah, go on.
and like, so I just want to add that, like, the other thing of this is, like, we're talking about this, and I'm kind of talking about my experience and the things that I was like I really liked, and I liked when things worked this way. But I'm not a salesperson either. I am not,
Mm,
right? So a lot of this, I was treating it as a design process because I'm a designer, right? Like, you have to treat it like a design process, in the sense that everything we would do, we would see if it worked or not. We would see if it
Mm,
worked or not. We would see if it worked or not. And I don't think I can claim that we were the greatest sales team ever, right?
mm,
So there's a lot more to this than that what we're talking about. But I think the biggest learning for me, which I wanted to just kind of mention here, is that it just showed me that just like you're trying to solve design problems on the project level, even sales is kind of similar. You just you
yeah,
need to kind of start asking the right questions, and you need to start going that, okay, how can I tweak things? What can I learn from it? You know, and kind of like the same thing, like empathizing on the other side and going, okay, why are they coming here? What are they looking for? Um,
right.
yeah, that was my approach, and yeah, it becomes fun.
That's
It becomes like a design problem to solve.
Yeah. Let me throw in another idea, and I just want to know what you think about this one. So when we are presenting options in that way, I'm just going back to that one a little bit. Uh, what we trying to mix and match, because there's this idea, right? Let If once you get a foot in the door, then you
Hmm.
start charging more and providing more services. So do you think that, what are your thoughts about getting foot into the door pricing? Start with that and then build
Yeah.
on it, or start with something that you genuinely believe is the right price, and don't get a foot in the door at a lower price. uh, how do you balance these two things? And I can just start it off
Yeah.
by saying that in the three options that we present, often enough the first option that we
This is
give
the
is
cheapest.
almost, it is the lowest priced obviously, but that at that price point we are trying to get our foot in the door, commit to the lowest scope that we can get away with, and
Yeah, yeah,
and just show them that, hey, your work can be done at such a low price as well, but
yeah,
we recommend price option 2 and 3 because you can get that much more value out of
yeah,
it.
yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
your thoughts about this approach, getting foot into the
I
door?
mean, like, what's your experience on getting the foot in the door when you offer a very cheap price, which you know your margins are really stretched,
Hmm.
let's say, right? And so, like, genuinely cheap. So remember that scope. So I'm not saying less scope meaning less price and more scope meaning more price, because that is still the same. It's just saying, okay, you can reduce the scope, you get less out of, the value you're offering is the same because the investment also reduces with what they get out of it, right?
Hmm.
In that scenario, if you were just doing that objectively, going, option
Hmm.
A is whatever, 100,000,
Hmm.
and you get A, B, C. Option B is
Hmm.
150,000, but you get A, B, C, D, E, and then
Hmm.
so on and so forth, right? So there, the value being delivered is the same for the investment. So in that scenario, I would imagine it's fine, right? Because you're not really gonna be delivering a cheaper service. But the question I want to ask you was, like, in that same scenario, if A, you really were actually giving a cheaper uh, service, delivering a cheaper
Hmm.
service, have you tried that? Like, and then trying to increase that over time, like, so I could say you'll get ABC in option E at 100,000,
Hmm.
and that means my margins there are only 5%.
Yeah.
And B is I would add A, B, C, D, but my margins are 20% as well. And the
Yeah.
client says, no, I'll take option A. And then how do you increase your margins after that? What's your experience been on that?
So yeah, it's been a little tough in the cases where we kind of get our foot in the door, and sometimes those are not necessarily with our creative services. Sometimes it might be with, say, hosting services. Like we have started
Yeah.
hosting as well, and we start saying that here is an option one, quite low margin, because you're also competing against like so many other hosting providers
Yeah, yeah.
giving you dirt cheap prices, right?
Yeah.
But at that point of time, what we realize is having this relationship helps us generate more business later on some other parameters, like maybe
Yeah, yeah.
design services, maybe development, maybe more feature thing. In those cases, it has worked out fine.
Yeah.
In our general pitches, when we give option 1, 2, and 3, we try our best that the client does not pick option 1. So because we don't want them to pick. So what
Yeah.
we would often think of trying to do is let it be option 1, which has probably a little less margin as well. Like, fair enough, there's a
Mm.
little lesser margin, the price is lesser, the scope is also lesser, but there's one key scope element which is
Hmm.
a good high value one, which is not there in option one. That's there in
Hmm, hmm,
option
hmm.
two, or
Yeah,
something like that.
yeah,
That would kind of incentivize them to pick at least option two or three,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
something on those lines. So I won't say I have enough experience in selling option one at a low margin,
Yeah.
and then seeing how the journey goes. I don't have, but I probably fear this as well. If we offer this and someone does take it up, what do I think our experience is going to be after that?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think I mean, so here's some examples of I think where I think actually that's worthwhile, right? So, um, sometimes with big corporates, we would just go for a very cheap project because that would get us through their vendor onboarding process. You work with, let's
Yeah,
say, Mercedes, Singapore Airlines. Vendor onboarding process is painful. So
yeah,
we don't wait till we find the right project. All we're trying to do is just be onboarded as a vendor. And then that just opens up like suddenly you have access to more people in the organization to talk to because they're like, oh, I've got this project, internal project. You're on the vendor panel, so let's have this conversation. Not
yeah.
everyone who's looking for a new project in Singapore Airlines, for example, is going to go look for new vendors. They are going to look at
Mm,
their panel because they also know how painful it is to work with legal and finance and accounting. So those
yeah.
scenarios, yeah, we would do that, right? But we would look at the organization and see if
Got that.
it doesn't
Actually,
have to be,
this. Yeah, go
yeah.
on. Please complete.
No, so in those scenarios, it's like, yeah, well, we're just trying to get on boarded as a partner, and then we will see. But I've still, even in those scenarios, seen a very, very high percentage of repeat projects that come out of things like that be very similar to what you first promised to deliver. Very,
Hmm.
very similar, because that's how now everyone sees you internally. So
Yeah,
you
that sets the
kind of have to be careful
expectations.
as well. There's sorry, you were gonna add something, so I want to
Yeah,
hear
I
that.
was
But I
going
have
to
an
add.
interesting take on this.
Yeah, I was going to add another dimension which I wanted to open up in our conversation with this. That I feel that one of the key elements in negotiations is to also know what are your pain points, what are the pain points that you need to overcome, and keep that also on the negotiation table in a way, because uh, it's not always saying that I'll change the scope and therefore the price will change, but it's
Mm,
also about considering these side implications, that hey, if I do this, I'll get on the vendor list, and that will open up a set of possibilities. In our case, I haven't been able to try this, but I learned this after a while. There have been a couple of clients, kind of partial government owned
mhm,
clients, wherein the just the vendor onboarding, the time taken to go through the sales process and the admin process is just so long, because it goes
mhm.
through several layers of bureaucracy, several layers of vetting and this and that. So
Yeah, yeah,
sometimes, just to understand that, hey, if you actually cut down that thing by 2 months or this months, then I'll give you a better price. If you are going to drag it for 6 months, then the price is going to be something like this.
yeah, yeah,
uh,
yeah.
so what I figured out is that a good thing that you also need to understand while you're trying to do negotiation is, it's not just about what scope you're covering and what price you're quoting. It's not about
Yeah,
that service, but also these side benefits. These are your pain points. You want to be on the vendor list, you
yeah,
want the
yeah,
sales process to happen quickly, and other things, or you want to have someone as a point person, like assign us a clear a single point of contact always, then I'll give you this price. But if you cannot assign us a single point of contact who goes throughout the thing, then the price, we cannot promise you this price. Like, figure out what are the other pain points that you can solve as a part of the negotiating table. Sometimes it's in one of the cases that I had used was, look, I'm going to work in the Indian work timings. If you're
yeah.
going to ask me to work at this price, if you're going to ask me at the like stretch beyond this PM, and because the client was not in our geography, in that case I
Mhm.
will not be able to work in these pricing with you, things
Yeah,
like that.
yeah,
So
yeah.
finding out things beyond scope to be a part of the negotiation table, so that you can also explain why your pricing is high,
Yeah,
or
yeah.
if you're lowering your price, you actually get something out of it as well, rather than just simply lowering your price. I feel is an important part of negotiation. What are your
I'd
thoughts
not
about
thought of
this?
it. Yeah, I'd not thought of it that way. I think that's quite interesting. Like, especially if you could go to a client and say, if you can cut down your procurement process by whatever, from 2 months to 2 weeks, I can give you this price, right? And if not, then there's this price. Um, I think that's quite interesting. I would still try. I'm still trying to think like, how would I? I'm basically trying to think like, how would I price that? Like, so if let's say I think this project is gonna cost me $100,000, or I would price it at $100,000. Would I give a discount on that? Like, so, okay, this brings me to another point, like another negotiation tactic, which we started doing was that rather than reducing price, we would give one-time discounts. Because over time we realized if you reduce the price, then that becomes your price for that client. So
Yeah,
we go, no, 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 no. If you can, for example, cut this by 2 months, I'll give you one-time discount of $10,000, for
yeah,
example,
got it.
because that means we don't have to wait. Like it cuts down. So maybe I was thinking about that. Maybe that's one approach to it, right?
That's
But
a
I would,
that's a great point. And on this thing, I had another side point, as a thing that you should have when you're approaching negotiation is have room for negotiation in your price. like like
yeah,
if you
yeah,
think something is 100 rupees, then your first price don't put at 100 rupees, put at 120 or something, because you need that leverage.
Hmm.
And you should absolutely expect the other side to negotiate. I think one of the things that we did bad when we said that take it or leave it, this is the price we have quoted to you, is that we have never also worked in a room for negotiation. And then when someone wants to negotiate, you almost feel offended, like how could you negotiate with that price, kind of a thing. So right.
Yeah,
So at that point of time your mindset changes, like, hey, I'm not offering really a discount. I've already
yeah,
quoted them a price which has that room for negotiation. If it is
yeah,
within 10%, I'm going to be okay with it. But if it goes, say, 20% or beyond, then
yeah,
I
yeah,
think
yeah.
then I'm really cutting on my price, kind of thing. So I think this is also a thing to add, like one time
I
discounts
think
or having a room for negotiation. Yeah.
I totally think so. I think it's a very cultural thing as well. In some cultures, you just know that you need to have that. Like, negotiation is almost like an automatic step of the process that's there.
Mhm.
And so yeah, I totally agree. Like at that point, like, so the price you quote, you want to make sure you have a little buffer. If you like here, for example, when working with governments, we know if at the final stages they say, okay, how can you make sweeten the deal for us, and we can say, well, we'll just give you a 10% discount if we can start on this project. It just takes you to the to the next step, because it's kind of almost expected, right?
Yeah.
And other scenarios, there are definitely certain scenarios where we've been very upfront about it and said, look, we're not buffering anything. So there is, like, we can keep on conversing, but there's no scope for negotiation unless we change the scope. But yeah, there is definitely that thing. Like, you bring up a really good point. Like, the other thing you have to keep in mind is, like, who are you talking to? If you're talking to a salesperson from a company, that
Mhm.
changes things as well, because sales teams are like, at least in Singapore, for example, and I'm sure in India as well, their goal is negotiation. They're like, their game is negotiation. So if you're not talking to
Yeah.
the salesperson, you want to keep that in mind. If you're talking to a technology founder, you don't maybe have to think that way. It's different, right? So
I
I think
actually
that's a
learned it the
bigger
hard
point.
way, and I think I'll slowly step into the some of the learnings, experiences, and concerns part for this negotiation. Uh, who you're talking to becomes so important, which you just pointed out. And in my experience, when I was working with a university, and then for all the project requirement, we are talking to a different set of people, but the procurement team is a different team.
Yeah,
They are so much harder with negotiations, because I feel they just approach it so dispassionately. All this while you have tried to build the relationship with with the set of people who really value your work, and then
yeah, yeah,
suddenly in the procurement there are these people who are absolutely approaching it transactionally, like, I cannot go with this price, you have to give
yeah,
a discount on this price. And
yeah,
there's no relationship, like all the investments you've made in the creating a relationship and all those things just
yeah,
goes
yeah, yeah,
out of the window. And at that point of time it's like, and they feel that there's nothing to lose.
Yeah.
in this, because they have no, they are not on your side basically
Yeah.
at that point in time. And so one of the things that I guess my learning out of this was that, a, have that buffer, expect negotiation to happen at a stage that goes beyond convincing, that like the clients are convinced they want you to be the vendor, but the procurement team will come in and try to negotiate, and that has been
Yeah.
quite a difficult experience for me. And I think as creatives, negotiation is very hard. Like it almost hurts at that point of time. Like, what do I do? Are you not valuing my work, essentially?
Mm.
And I think being slightly dispassionate over there is a good thing. I've definitely had moments where I walk out of the meeting absolutely shivering, and there is anger and
Anger. Yeah.
rage. Yeah, and all those things that, like, and I think I'm trying to learn that this is a part of the job. This is something that you got to do. And
Yeah.
one of the key things in this that I kind of identified is that if you don't take it either partly personally, but also partly in the sense that, like, if you have to be good at these negotiations, then you need to have that conviction that you're prepared to let go.
Yeah.
If you're not prepared to let go of that project at that point of time, you will never be able to match up to the negotiation on the other side, from the other side, because these people at the sales team and or
Yeah.
the procurement team are absolutely approaching it as, it's like, it doesn't matter to them whether the project doesn't go through, or the thing gets stuck in the pipeline for in
Yeah.
my
Yeah.
case, that thing was stuck in the pipeline for 7 months.
Yeah.
After 7 months, I got we got out of that logjam basically. And it does, and it seems that they have nothing to lose, and whereas we were losing our sleep, and we don't know when to
Yeah.
schedule it, and
Yeah.
we had blocked our timeline, and we were losing even more, we had not committed our time to another project, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
so I think for you to be a good negotiator, you have to always have this option on the table, that it's okay if that project goes away, otherwise probably you'll never be able to match negotiation.
I think you're right. Like you can always, after the first or second meeting with whoever you're talking to, ask them to hand you your procurement team's requirements. Like that's
Hmm.
another thing. You can just ask for that right up front. Like if you know, I mean, these kind of things I think come like you're talking about this because you've had the experience now, right? And over time,
Yeah.
I think you should. It becomes how painful this can be, so like maybe it's about asking right in the after the first couple of conversations where you think this will actually go in a way like before you give any kind of quotes you say that maybe it's about going that okay well do you have a like how is what's the next steps,
What's
who
the
has to
next
review this,
steps?
is it
Yeah.
legal, procurement, and if they're like yeah there's legal there's procurement you go okay here's a default template of our contract, here's how it's going to be price or do you have any does the procurement team have any price range etc right. Maybe it's about that. Maybe it's just about really preempting it and going, give me all the details I need to know, so that I don't get surprised later on. But yeah,
Yeah.
it though that can be very very painful. You're right that at that point, most of the time, it's always been about kind of negotiating. Like it's about like giving in a little, taking a little, giving a little, taking a little. Um, the points where it's I can think of two examples where it worked even though procurement was being very hard. And both of those scenarios, the people who we were talking to were the people who really wanted this project to go. Like they had their career depending on this project, or they joined the company to work on this kind of project, so they were trying to bring in the best vendor. So they were able to create that pressure from internal, from inside as well. We've also seen scenarios where the person we were negotiating to used the negotiate. So eventually, basically, we're using the procurement as the bad cop. So they were like, "Oh, I'm the good cop. This is the bad cop.
Yeah.
Good cop, bad cop routine."
Yeah.
Um, it's painful. Yeah,
Yeah,
that
yeah,
part is
yeah,
very
yeah.
painful.
So I think I have, after my first experience with procurement teams, I started asking that, what's your process?
Yeah,
And I've never had a good success with this so far. Like, I think I have to get better at this, because they explain that, yeah, there is this, but that's going to be easy, simple, we'll help you along, and this and that. So
yeah,
they themselves downplay the procurement process, but when the
yeah,
actual procurement process has to happen, that is
yeah,
when the problems reveal themselves. Like, yeah, they
yeah,
downplay it. So I think now my general rule in my mind is, if there is a procurement process, then it's going to be painful. Just assume
Okay,
that.
let me bring a different perspective to this, right? So I work in house.
Yeah.
I have a procurement team. I have a legal team.
Yeah.
And in the last 3 months, I've onboarded two partners, two vendors,
Hmm.
right? And so I'm kind of now sitting on the other side. So it just made me think, I'm like, how am I treating that? And this is how I treat it, right? So I think both of our partners, we were able to onboard them within a week to 2 weeks.
Hmm.
Actually, no, that's not true. Sometime in one case, it took almost a month. Um, we tried. Well, I kind of had, because I'd been on the other side, I knew how painful it could be. So we tried to make it as painless as possible. I tried to support them throughout it all, right? Which meant that I was kind of pitching or creating that kind of urgency internally as well. That look, I really need to get this done. We need to respond because we need to start on this project. So I think we had that on our side. But as someone who was trying to onboard a vendor, I kind of looked at it this way, which I need to rethink this. I spent 2 months looking for the right partner,
Hmm.
right? And I'm like, okay, I need to find the right partners. And then we're like, okay, we've shortlisted this candidate, this partner for this project, this partner for this project. Now bring them on board. The challenge, now this is coming from the other perspective, from inside, right?
Yeah.
You're the
Yeah.
vendor, I'm in the inside.
Yeah.
That was as soon as I was able to do that, and now it was like, okay, legal has to deal with it, procurement has to deal with it, finance has to deal with it. I kind of had to let it go. I couldn't, I was like, I can't influence it much now. And if it
Yeah.
doesn't go through now, in some ways, there was two conflicting thoughts in my mind. On the one hand, I'm like, this is important. I need to get this done because I like this. We need to do this work. I really need to get this done. But at the same time, I'm like, if at this point it doesn't work through, I can shift the blame. I think at the back of my mind, I'm like, the blame is now on the legal team because they
Yeah.
don't, they're not cooperating or whatever or whatever. So
Yeah.
it's 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 that black hole, I would say, which is
This is a very nice insight, Nav. Very nice insight, because all this while we used to believe, as being on the outside, that hey, if they really wanted us, they will make the process smoother for us. But there's so many things at play. You're busy with you have other things to do. You have given it
yeah,
to
yeah,
that
yeah.
team and let them handle it. Sometimes it'll be out of your mind, and yeah, and sometimes it's just human to think that yeah, it's them now. Now I have done my part. Like you have spent those 2 months in
Yeah, yeah,
evaluating the
yeah,
right
yeah.
partner.
the
So
the
yeah.
difference, I think, like now, just as I was saying this, I was really trying to play it back in my mind. I think so. One difference was there, that because I've been on the other side, I was being very clear about it. I was like, okay, I remember both of those partners. As soon as we got to that point of, I was like, pretty sure this is gonna result in a signing. Like, so we signed up with two partners, but I think with five different partners, I started the onboarding process, like vendor onboarding. Let's just kick that
Hmm.
off right now. We're still in negotiation, but I want to kick that off because I know it's going to take time. So that's one thing that I was able to do that made it, just in terms of how long it took, a little less painful, right? That was
Hmm.
definitely one thing. The other thing was on the pricing, I became very adamant. Because I was trying to get these projects done myself. I was pitching for these internally, and I got the budgets internally very clear. I wanted to be very clear what our budget is. And I was very clear on the budget. So when the procurement team started asking questions, I was very adamant, and I said, "Look, this is approved. We're doing it at this price. We don't want to waste any more time on this." So I think those two things I would like to think that I did that actually helped us get the procurement process maybe a little less painful. On the
Hmm.
legal side, there were definitely things. There were still a legal team was still going. And here's the other thing: I have to. This is my legal team. I need to trust them as well, right?
Yeah.
I can't just
Absolutely.
listen. I'm like, well, they know more than this. There were definitely a few things where I went back and I said, look, this doesn't. I don't think this poses a lot of risk. Why are we making this a point of contention? And legal team was also like, okay, fair enough. Let's just move on from this. Um, so I
Yeah,
think there
yeah.
were
So,
some
but
we
eventually, but I think these are great examples of the fact that you are always negotiating internally with people. It's not always just the sales negotiation. So I
oh yeah,
think
yeah.
negotiation as a thing is much broader than just selling and pricing and all those things. Which kind of brings me to this kind of near the end question, which is who should be negotiating from your
Hmm.
studio, what qualities do you think a person who has to do negotiation should have? If you can just talk a little bit about that.
I think it's like who should be designing in the studio, right? It has to be someone
Okay.
who enjoys it. It has to be someone who can learn it, who's interested in it. If you're a bunch of designers, you need to figure out who's the best person. Like, you know, in our scenario, after a while, I mean, it was a factor of, it was, part of it was because we were growing as well. We brought in someone. We said, no, we need
Mhm.
a dedicated salesperson, because I was like, well, someone who has experience in this is going to be way better than. So in fact, our salesperson was, which is actually, which is why you will see a lot of teams, even small teams, they will have very senior salespeople, because that's what drives the business.
Yeah.
You need someone who can be patient, who can negotiate, understands, who's not going to walk out of a room with that passionate anger like you or I would, because we're passionate about
Yeah.
what we do. I'm like,
Yeah.
how did you say this? What do you think?
Chest
Why are you
pains.
wasting
Like
my
there's a
time?
chest pain that happens
Yeah,
when you are
yeah,
in
yeah.
the room with this.
See, like,
It's
you
oh
want someone who walks out of those conversations just calmly and just looks at it
yeah.
and go, okay, that's how we're going to turn it, or this is how we will do it. Um, so I think at one level it's that, right, that find the right person. At the second level, negotiating again, like it's a lot about changing that mindset from about it's being about price and sales. You're negotiating all the time. You're going to be negotiating salaries, even if you're not selling projects. You're building a
Yeah.
team. You're going to be negotiating salaries. People who you're
Yeah.
hiring. It's the same thing. How can you show them the value of why they should join your team versus someone else, right? It's all about that, right? So, um, it's yeah. I mean, you you would know between the two of you, three of you, four of you, however, who's the best person, who's willing to go, hey, this could be interesting and this could be exciting, and I'm gonna learn this, and it's, it has to be that person, or you bring in someone else who can do it well for you, for sure, for
Right.
sure.
I
That's
think so.
a whole other thing.
Definitely takes a
There's
little bit
another
of a temperament. Yeah. Go on.
there's another thing that negotiating, like bringing in an external made me think of this. Bringing in an external, a salesperson. One thing that you won't be able to do if it's a salesperson negotiating on your behalf is being able to really um, reframe the problems that the clients are approaching. So what I mean by that is that's why in big consultancies you don't have sales teams, you have designers who grow up to be directors, right? You have the five levels of growth and directorship. A lot
Yeah.
of big consultancies will say a director is someone who's bringing in business as well, and they have to be designers grown up to be like that. And the reason for that is a lot of times clients, like we were talking about guidance, right? Clients who are looking for guidance, they will come to us and say, "Hey, I want an app." You want to be able to help them reframe it, and if you're not a designer,
Exactly.
it's very hard to do that. So the most relevant example, I guess, here is that you were talking about getting your foot in the door.
Hmm.
Getting your foot in the door doesn't always have to be that you give the cheapest option, right? Like we were discussing,
Yeah.
that just then labels you as that. Getting your foot in the door, for example, us, one thing that we used a lot was we would help the client see that maybe they don't have a clear definition of what they're trying to do. So we will work with you for 3 weeks. It will be a paid commitment, and we will help you create a design brief. So we will
Yeah.
talk to you, so, and we would just give them a plan, and it would be very genuine. It would be like the first 3 weeks of a project. I would say at the end of it, we would help you define the brief, and then it's up to you. You can still continue working with us, or you can work with someone else. And if you could, like, if the client's budget is, let's say, 150,000, and we say, okay, 15,000, 2 weeks, we're going to help you define the brief.
Yeah.
It
This
gives a
this this
sense
is
of,
a great one. Because we have also started doing since the last 2 3 years, we have been doing workshops with our clients to frame the problem better, to frame the scoping of the project better. The
yeah,
workshop is immensely useful for clarity for the client as well as for us in a
yeah,
way.
yeah,
And once you go through that workshop experience, then there is that great relationship that has been built. And
yeah,
even if you say that at the end of this, that you can go ahead with any other vendor or any other team to build the project, uh, the likelihood of them trusting you is much higher. uh,
yeah,
uh, the big problem that I have always felt with this is that I feel that the workshop tends to be the highest value delivered, and then then can that be given at a low cost? That should
yeah,
probably be given at a high cost. And so it's very
Uh,
confusing for me.
I mean, it is also opening that other Pandora's box, which is like, how do you sell a workshop? Because
Yeah.
that becomes another service. Then you're like, how do I frame this? How do I sell that?
Yeah, but
Yeah,
this conversation just can go forever. Let me just complete the full circle, come back to our clickbaity title,
yeah.
Nav, as a closure to this. Can negotiation help us triple a client's budget?
Wait a minute. Um, yeah, of course it can.
so
I
so
mean,
so this so this the phrasing of this session itself had come from one of our early conversations, where there were times where you said that, yeah, we have had experiences where the initial brief got
yeah,
changed
yeah,
to a
yeah,
point that the client budgets got tripled in a way.
yeah, yeah,
Would
yeah,
you
yeah.
like tell, is it possible for you to tell just one story very briefly that can kind of be an inspiration for us to
Oh yeah,
just
totally.
try
Like,
for it?
yeah, totally. We were working. This is like, I think this is what that inspired even that conversation in that episode. We were called in by Daimler
Hmm.
to pitch on a project, and they were like, and they found us through a referral or something. Doesn't matter. But they were like, hey, we've got these set of wireframes,
Hmm.
and we're looking for a partner to build this app. So like, okay, cool. And they gave us a set of wireframes that their internal team had built. So we looked at those set of wireframes and we were like, okay, that we were like, we couldn't understand what the goal of that app was, and we weren't trying to say this was wrong. We were genuinely like, okay, can someone who can we sit with on your team to understand what this is trying to do? Like the brief was literally, here's a set of wireframes, tell us how much it'll cost to build this app. And we're like, well, the wireframes don't tell us the whole story. We don't know what's going on, so let's start having that conversation. And we started discussing this conversation, having this conversation with one of the teams who'd built it, and we realized there was a visual designer from marketing who'd been brought in, and they were trying to set up a new team. They were trying to do the right things. They were trying to set up a new product team, and they got this person in, and they built the wireframes. And as we were doing that, we started talking to them, and we're like, okay, what kind of budget do you have for this, right? And I can't remember the numbers, but it was let's say 150,000.
Yeah.
120,000 comes to my mind. I don't know if that was right or wrong. I shouldn't be talking about numbers anyway, but
Yeah.
let's say it was 150,000. So it was that we were like, okay, cool. And our initial reaction was like, we were like, actually, sounds like a decent budget for what they're looking to build. Like we're like, okay, this sounds fair. Okay. Started discussing more. But because we were having these conversations with this junior visual designer who was trying to explain it, there were still tons of question marks around this. Tons of question marks that he couldn't answer. He was like, I don't know. They asked me to do this, do this. We're like, okay, who else can we talk to? Because we at that point were concerned about, hey, you're kind of made the screen, but we don't know like the back end. Are you going to be building it? Do you expect us to be building it? What are you trying to do? And so we were like, we were basically trying to find the right people to talk to. And Daimler just went, wait, look, we can spend a lot of time. You've already spent 2 weeks talking about this. You need to tell us how much it's going to cost. And it was at that point we were like, what do we do now? Like we could say yes and we could just kind of risk and it'll be, getting in the door with Daimler and all of that. And so we ended up going back and saying that, look, your wireframes are only telling us one side of the story. What we're going to propose is we do a $30,000 project where we will rebuild, not rebuild, we'll review your wireframes and we will come up with a more comprehensive set of wireframes plus the logic documents and define what other systems need to be built. And that kind of started that chat, and they were like, okay, let's do it. And then that kicked off, I think like it was like 4 or 5 weeks where we just sat with the same team that had done the wireframes, reviewed the wireframes first, started building. So we started building the information architecture of the project, and basically through that we showed them that they'd again just looked at the app, not considered where that stuff is going to come from. To enable this feature in the app, you have to build this other app or do other things and all of that. So we worked on it for 5 weeks, and basically that just opened up. We worked with Daimler beyond that for 3 years till I left.
Hmm.
Uh, it was one of the most lucrative partnerships we had. Daimler, after a year, ended up setting up an entire team of product that we were working with exclusively. It was great. It was great. So I mean, it's not as in they just said, "I'll just give pay you 3 times the budget." It's not like Wolf of Wall Street type of tripling the client's budget, but it just from a hundred and
But
twenty thousand project, it turned into a project that's overall over 3 years, value is more than 10 times of their initial budget.
Yep, and I
So
think that's a perfectly valid, like a great story in this, because you kind of touched upon lots of things that we talked about in negotiation, talking to the right people, asking the right question, asking the hard questions, uh, like doing a small assignment with them at a lesser cost so that you can show the value to them. And once you
yeah,
show to the value to them, then the budgets can increase as well.
I think
I
to close this, I'll add one other thing, right? Like this is an
Mhm.
example of where it worked. There are lots of examples that I don't remember where we
It
probably
wouldn't
use the
have.
same approach and it doesn't work because the client was just like, no, we're not interested in redoing the wireframes. We already have the wireframes. And I think that I don't remember them, but that was a very valuable experience as well because that meant we ended up not working with a client that we would have been unhappy with because they were just like, we're not interested in redoing the wireframes. And if we were to pick up that project from there, we would have just been miserable, like most likely. It'd be like trying to build something that doesn't make sense. 2 months in, we're renegotiating scope, and they're like, "No, you've already signed on 120,000." We're like, "This is
Yeah,
like a $600,000 project." All of that mess, right? So I think approach is sound, and all the projects that we didn't get because of this approach were the right things as well, were the right outcomes as
right.
well.
That's great. So you could either triple a client's budget through this approach, or you could one third it
Decent,
and still be happy about it. I guess that's what matters.
I guess. Yeah, yeah,
So,
yeah.
all right. So thanks a lot for this conversation, Nav. It was like one more great conversation with you. For everyone who's going to watch us on YouTube later, we have a Twitter handle called Two Studio Heads. You can use that Twitter handle to tweet ideas to us. What are the business aspects about running small creative studios that we can? What are the topics that we can cover in our future conversations? And if you want to participate in these conversations as well, please tweet to us or DM us on two studio heads. Every 4 or 5 different episodes where we are having a chat like this, we also try to do an open house wherein more people can just participate and we can just have freewheeling conversations in that as well. So if you're interested in any of those, please reach out to us through Twitter. I think that's the best way to stay in touch. And with that, I think thanks a lot for giving your Saturday or
Thanks.
whenever you're
Thanks,
watching
Alex.
us.
Yeah,
Bye, everyone.
thanks. Bye.